every level of the federal court. You clerked for a Supreme Court justice, one widely respected on both sides, which really shaped you. You left there and you went to private practice, and you know what you found? This is what you told me. That you had those tough choices that working moms have to make, the demands of a private law firm, raising your kids. It just didn't add up. You went before this Senate 3 times in a bipartisan manner. God bless America. We don't do that much stuff bipartisan around here. You went to become a public defender because you wanted to understand all aspects of the law. Who does that? We live in a society that's very materialistic sometimes, very, very consumeristic. You went into, do people become public defenders for the money? No. Your family and you speak to service, service, service. And I'm telling you right now, I'm not letting anybody in the Senate steal my joy. I told you this at the beginning. I'm embarrassed. It happened earlier today. I just look at you and I start getting full of emotion. I'm jogging this morning, and I'm at the end of the block I live on. And I get terrified because I put my music on loud when I'm jogging, trying to block out the noise of the heart attack I'm having. And this woman comes up on me, practically tackles me, an African-American woman. And the look on her eyes, she just wanted to touch me, because I'm sitting so close to you, and tell me what it meant to her to watch you sitting where you're sitting. And you did not get there because of some left-wing agenda. You didn't get here because of some dark money groups. You got here how every black woman in America who's gotten anywhere has done, by being like Ginger Rogers said, I did everything Fred Astaire did, but backwards in heels. And so I'm just sitting here saying, nobody's stealing my joy. Nobody's going to make me angry, especially not people that are called in a conservative magazine demagogic for what they're bringing up that just doesn't hold water. I'm not going to let my joy be stolen, because I know you and we appreciate something that we get that a lot of my colleagues don't. I know Tim Scott does. When I first came to this place, I was the 4th black person ever popularly elected to the United States Senate. And I still remember a lot of mixed people, white folks, black folks work here, but at night when people are in line to come in to clean this place, the percentage of minorities shift a lot. And so I'm walking here, first week I'm here, and somebody who's been here for decades doing the urgent work of the Senate, but it's the unglamorous work that goes on no matter who's in offices. The guy comes up to me, all he wants to say, I can tell, is, I'm so happy you're here. But he comes up and he can't get the words out, and this man, my elder, starts crying. And I just hugged him, and he just kept telling me, it is so good to see you here. It's so good to see you here. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I love my brother Tim Scott. We could write a dissertation on our disagreements. He gave the best speech on race. I wish I could have given good of a speech. But talking to the challenges and indignities that are still faced. And you're here. I was in the White House with my Democratic colleagues, and I'm in my joy. I can't help it. and the president's asking our advice, who should we nominate and whatever. And I look at Kamala and we have a knowing glance, which we've had for years when she and I used to sit on this end of this committee at times. And then I try to get out to the president what it means. What it means. And I want to tell you, when I look at you, this is why I get emotional. I'm sorry, you're a person that is so much more than your race and gender. You're a Christian, you're a mom, you're an intellect, you love books, but for me, I'm sorry, it's hard for me not to look at you and not see my mom, not to see my cousins, one of them who had to come here and sit behind you. She had to have your back. I see my ancestors and yours. Nobody's going to steal the joy of that woman in the street or the calls that I'm getting or the texts. Nobody's going to steal that joy. You have earned this spot. You are worthy. You are a great American. Your hero is Constance Baker Motley. Mine, she has sat on my desk for my offices that I've held. She's my icon of America. Her name is Harriet Tubman. There is a love in this country that is extraordinary. You admitted it about your parents. They loved this nation, even though there were laws preventing them from getting together. When they were loving, there were laws in this country that would have prevented you from marrying your husband. It wasn't that long ago, it was last generation. But they didn't stop loving this country, even though this country didn't love them back. And what were the words of your heroes and mine? What did Constance Baker Motley do? Did she, this country that she saw insult and injuries, when she came out of law school, law firms wouldn't even hire her because she was a woman. Did she become bitter? Did she try to create a revolution? No, she used the very constitution of this nation. She loved it so much, she wanted America to be America. As Langston Hughes wrote, "Oh, let America be America again." The land that never has been yet, but yet must be the land where everyone is free. Oh, yes, I say it plain, America never was America to me, but I swear this oath, America will be. That is the story of how you got to this desk, you and I and everyone here, generations of folk who came here and said, America, I'm Irish. You may say, no, Irish or dogs need to fly, but I'm going to show this country that I can be free here. I can make this country love me as much as I love it. Chinese American
shop without him being there.
There he is.
The lower house parliament. According to a
can only do all of this because of
this nation live up to its promise and hope. LGBTQ Americans, from Stonewall women to Seneca, hidden figures who didn't even get their play until some Hollywood movie finally talked about them and how they were critical for us defying gravity. All of these people loved America. And so you faced insults here that were shocking to me. Well, actually not shocking. But you are here because of that kind of love. And nobody's taken this away from me. So you got 5 more folk to go through. 5 more of us. And then you can sit back and let us have all the debates. And I'm going to tell you, it's going to be a well-charted Senate floor because it's not going to stop. They're going to accuse you of this and that. Heck, in honor of your person who shares your birthday, you might be called a communist. But don't worry, my sister. Don't worry. God has got you. And how do I know that? Because you're here. And I know what it's taken for you to sit in that seat. Harriet Tubman is one of my heroes because the more I read about this person, the more, she was viciously beaten. For her whole life, she used to fall into spells, cracked skull. She faced starvation, chased by dogs. And when she got to freedom, what did she do? Did she rest? No, she went back. Again and again and again. The sky was full of stars. But she found one that was a harbinger of hope for better days, not just for her and those people that were enslaved, but a harbinger of hope for this country. And she never gave up on America. She fought led troops in the Civil War. She was involved in the suffrage movement. And as I came back from my run, after being near assaulted by someone on the street, I thought about her and how she looked up. She kept looking up. No matter what they did to her, she never stopped looking up. And that star, it was a harbinger of hope. Today, you're my star. You are my harbinger of hope. This country is getting better and better and better. And when that final vote happens and you ascend onto the highest court in the land, I'm gonna rejoice. And I'm gonna tell you right now, the greatest country in the world, the United States of America, will be better because of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Booker. We're going to take a 10-minute break.
Thank you.
And come back and have the last 5 senators ask their questions.
Everything is mystery.
Would you please let her respond?
No, not if she's not going to answer my
Well, if you're
question.
Committee Chairman Dick Durbin admonished his Republican colleagues for their talking points appearing to appeal to movements like QAnon, which peddles false conspiracies about Democrats and pedophiles.
Your nomination turned out to be a testing ground for conspiracy theories and culture war theories.
And videos.
Cruz, Jackson's Harvard Law School classmate, made news with his question about the upcoming affirmative action case going before the justices next term, where Harvard is a defendant.
You're on the Board of Overseers of Harvard. If you're confirmed, do you intend to recuse from this lawsuit?
That is my plan, Senator.
Democratic lawmakers again using much of their time to allow Jackson to talk about her record and the historic nature of her nomination.
I do consider myself, having been born in 1970, to be the first generation to benefit from the civil rights movement. And so what my being here, I think, is about, at some level, is about the progress that we've made in this country in a very short period of time.
As the hearings wrap up, it's unclear if Jackson's confirmation will receive any Republican support. Now, Senator Graham, despite voting to confirm Jackson to be a circuit judge less than a year ago, is a likely no. And other possible Republican yes votes say they're still evaluating or they're saying nothing at all. So, Wolf, this could be one of the closest Supreme Court confirmation votes in U.S. history.
We'll find out very soon. Paula Reed, thank you very much. The breaking news continues next. We're live here from Brussels with more on the U.S. formally declaring that Russia is committing war crimes in Ukraine. We'll talk about that and more with the White House Principal Deputy National Security Advisor. Stay with us. And later, here in the Situation Room, former President Bill Clinton joins me to remember former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, who died today at the age of 84.
Come on, Percy.
Well, we've certainly felt like spring over the past several days. Maybe not so much today or yesterday, but if you take those 2 days out, the last week or so, it's felt pretty nice across the area. You look at those highs over the last week in the Sioux Falls area, and other than yesterday and today being below average, we've been above average for quite some time. And of course, we hit 73 on Sunday, which ended up tying the daily record for that day. In Aberdeen, again, feeling like spring. I mean, 69 was our warmest on Sunday, which was a couple degrees short of the record. But even the last few.
In a couple of the cases, it's been a homeless man or somebody who is mentally ill and deranged and maybe let out of prison and is hanging around there without business. It's very different.
I think that's why it's so.
Do you take aspirin?
Employee and get the best deals on every smartphone.
That's all that's been happening. But I was wondering, I have a question for the judge, because, like, in this case, it seems like the object of the assault, the woman, dictates the severity of the crime. It's like if she had pushed Jesse or me, we would have been like, what's that? Right, but she pushed a female in her late 80s, and her push then becomes like the murder weapon. Is that going to be part of the defense, that it's like...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What we have in our criminal justice system is the mens rea test. What is the intent of the individual? And that's what, you always try to tell jurors when they come back and say, well, how do we know what the accused's intent was? You determine it by the circumstances or, how they handled themselves. But it's not just the resulting crime. It is, you've got to get in her mind.
All right, Jesse, any thoughts
You
here?
want to know what my biggest fear is?
What?
Punching someone in the face, they fall and they crack their head open and die.
That's your biggest
That's
fear?
That
your
is my biggest fear. Because then...
Symptoms take over you. And for kids, try allergist.
Change tomorrow night. And there's still a good amount of dry air in place, so a lot of this might not reach the ground, but what does fall and reach the ground is not going to accumulate a whole lot. Then the wind really picks up behind that system, and it is going to be downright windy into our day Friday. I would not be surprised if wind alerts get issued for parts of the Dakota News Now coverage area. So Friday is going to be kind of a nuisance again with that wind, just like it has been the past couple of days. So the impact meter through tomorrow, not expecting anything because the winds are going to be calm, and again, that rain is not going to be anything significant. But on Friday, though, it'll be a little bit of a minor and times a moderate just because of the fact we're going to see those very strong winds. So if you have any loose objects outside, you may want to secure them down, maybe avoid wearing a hat. You know, it might be one of those cases you might not want to do that, otherwise be chasing that down the street. And you can see, at least for the weekend, though, we are quiet. But then the First Alert Weather Team is going to be keeping an eye on next week because we have a chance at least every day next week of seeing some precipitation. Now, of course, we're still several days away. There's a lot of details that still have to be ironed out, but it looks like we will see a chance at points next week of seeing some rain and, yes, even a little bit of snow as well.
Decades-old judicial martyrs, but the activist base knows them, if only as victims of some long-ago Democratic treachery. Let's bring in our all-star panel, Michelle Goodwin, professor of law at the University of California, Irvine. Also with us, Erin Carmone, senior correspondent for New York Magazine and co-author of the book, The Notorious RBG, The Life and Times of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Jason Johnson is back with us. All right, Michelle, I want to play some of Senators Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley today pressing Judge Jackson again on her work in child pornography cases. Take a listen.
I've taken every case seriously. These are
Do you have anything
very
to say about the
horrible
Hess case? I'm asking you specifically
crimes,
about the Hess
and
case.
I've taken every case seriously.
So you're not going to answer that?
These are very horrible crimes, as was that one.
You gave him 3 months. My question is, do you regret it or not?
Senator, what I regret is that in a hearing about my qualifications to be a justice on the Supreme Court, we've spent a lot of time focusing on this small subset of my sentences.
Professor Goodwin, you gave us a preview of your thoughts when you tweeted 30 years ago, Anita Hill brought forward her experiences before the Senate Judiciary Committee. It was a shameful display by members of our Senate today. Flashbacks. Your reaction to the performance we saw yesterday and today?
Well, it's chilling, and it belies the august body that the Senate is and the Senate Judiciary Committee is supposed to be. We've seen the attacks against Judge Jackson. She has not been alleged to have sexually assaulted anyone, as we saw in the case of Justice now Brett Kavanaugh. She is not alleged to have sexually harassed employees under her supervision, which was the case involving the allegations against now Justice Thomas. And so there are flashbacks to the experience that Anita Hill had when she came before the United States Senate, this Judiciary Committee comprised of some of the same people, and was treated in such a shameful and frankly embarrassing way for this body. And the attacks that she has experienced as she has spoken quite openly, honestly, with poise, grace, and dignity about more than 500 cases, and they keep circling to this very narrow set of cases, which is really a bit of cherry picking. And one last thing that I'd like to say, this line of questioning about do you regret your sentencing is really also quite harmful, I think, for this body to do that line of questioning, because we need judges to be able to judge, and judges cannot always predict what the outcome of these cases are. They base their decisions, especially on the trial court, in based on the facts that are in front of them, weighing all manner of factors, and it is hard to predict what happens next. There are many other factors outside of the court and outside of the judge's jurisdiction that determine what happens in a person's life who was a criminal defendant.
Erin, I want you to talk about Judge Jackson's responses today to some of these criticisms of her judicial decisions. You say she didn't take the bait. Tell me more.
Well, it seems clear that not only are Republicans wanting to relitigate the Kavanaugh hearings, they also somehow want to elicit a response from Judge Jackson that is in some way comparable to the way that Brett Kavanaugh screamed, cried, accused the Clintons of orchestrating this whole thing, said that the people would reap the whirlwind. Really undignified display that still resulted in him getting confirmed. Ketanji Brown Jackson, as Michelle pointed out, hasn't been accused of anything. There are no witnesses here against her the way there were for him. But she has been accused of being soft on child predators, despite a record that shows her to be well within the mainstream, considering all different factors in incredibly difficult and disturbing cases. And so I think what's interesting is that they seem to be trying to bait her so that they can use a clip in which they peg her as an angry black woman, which they can then feed to their base. And barring that, they can feed to their base viral clips in which they are screaming at this black woman, particularly Ted Cruz today, a really disgraceful display from Ted Cruz on a day where lots of people distinguish themselves theatrically, sort of taking things out of context, being unfair, being reductive, being not factual. But what she has continued to do is react with dignity and poise, stick to the facts, be really narrow and patient in all of her answers. And of course, my understanding is that as a black woman, she has had to do so many, many times. But this is an unprecedented national stage. And so to watch her for 12 hours yesterday and many more hours today and many more hours to come, I think has been a real masterclass in dignity.
Right, and in patience, as you said. Jason, Republican Judiciary Committee member Senator Mike Lee said this on Fox today: "We deserve to get some answers regarding her pattern of low sentences in this hearing. This doesn't mean we are attacking her character. I don't think you can point to a single time when Republicans have used the politics of personal destruction on a Supreme Court nomination." Your reaction?
I mean, it's a lie. It's all a lie. They're all lying. And look, this is probably the first time in my life that I have ever quoted or paraphrased Clarence Thomas. But 30 years ago, we all remember, Clarence Thomas said, "This is a high-tech lynching of an uppity black man." This is not a lynching, but it is certainly a flogging. And it's a flogging because the Republicans know they can't stop Judge Brown Jackson from getting in. She's going to end up on the Supreme Court. So the only thing they can do now is publicly flog this intelligent, capable, qualified black woman to the best of their ability with every single crazy QAnon conspiracy they can come up with. They're going to use it to express their bigotry about trans rights. They're going to use her to express their bigotry and their QAnon conspiracies and their anti-Muslim sentiments. That's all this is. And the reason this is so problematic is because it's not going to change anybody's votes. She's going to get on regardless.
Michelle Goodwin, Erin Carmon.
Okay. I still think that that photo should not have been on the cover, and it could have been embedded in the shoot.
I thought, you know what? The other thing is, I would have owned it. I would have been like, I look good in Converse.
Well, she
and
does.
I'm cool.
But that.
Just stop complaining.
All
Just
right.
own it.
And she's on Vogue. Come on.
Okay.
Melania Trump was.
One more thing is up next.
Exactly.
1992. Clinton, in turn, tapped her for the post of U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations after he won the White House. As UN Ambassador, Albright became known for her tenacity and determination to elevate U.S. interests at the UN through what she called aggressive multilateralism.
We must summon the spine to deter, the support to isolate, and the strength to defeat those who run roughshod over the rights of others.
She pushed hard for U.S. boots on the ground in the Balkans. The U.S. administration chose diplomacy instead, a decision that came at a costly human price. An even bigger regret, the failure of the U.S. to intervene to stop the Rwandan genocide in 1994.
I, Madeleine Corbell Albright.
Lessons learned from her past and the present, as Albright cemented her place in history, becoming the first ever female U.S. Secretary of State on January 23, 1997. When the Kosovo conflict erupted in 1998, Albright lobbied forcefully for NATO intervention. The NATO-led effort helped Kosovo gain independence from Serbian control, and the ICC indicted Serbian President Slobodan Milosevic for war crimes.
Never again will there be massacres and mass graves.
Through it all, Albright's experience as a refugee who found the American dream was omnipresent in her life.
My life reflects both the turbulence of Europe in the middle of this century and the tolerance and generosity of America throughout its existence.
In her later years, Albright's comments in support of Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton backfired.
There's a special place in hell for women who don't help each other.
She apologized for the timing of her so-called undiplomatic moment in a New York Times op-ed and seized the opportunity to make a passionate case for gender equality by saying, "My hope is that young women will build on the progress we have made, but that will happen only if women help one another. And for those who do that, there will always be a special place of honor."
That was CNN's Richard Roth remembering Madeleine Albright, who died at the age of 84. And coming up, I'm going to speak live with former President Bill Clinton. He'll share his thoughts on the loss of Madeleine Albright. That's coming up very, very shortly. Also, there's more breaking news we're following. We're continuing to watch all the late-breaking developments on President Biden's high-stakes trip here to Brussels to huddle with allies as Russia's invasion of Ukraine unleashes terror on millions of people. We're live from the European headquarters. Our special coverage continues next.
Blinken issued a statement announcing that based on information that is currently available, the U.S. government assesses that Russia's forces
got 7,000 photos on your phone, and sometimes
Griner in, quote, good condition. This comes after U.S. officials last week said they had not yet been granted access to Griner, who is in detention in Russia after cannabis products were found in her luggage at the Moscow airport. Her detention has been extended until May 19th. We're going to be right back.
Some people have minor joint pain, plus have high blood pressure. They may not be able to take just anything for pain.
Victorian, cottage, Tudor, it's all.
But it's like, you know, Supernova and his sidekick Starch.
The need for any kind of moisture, be it rain, snow, or otherwise, only continues to grow across KELO, and beyond the middle of this week, the waiting game is only going to continue. The weather pattern over the last several weeks has not been very kind to us. System after system has either missed us to the north or south, and anything that has come our way has either been lacking in moisture or has only helped a small portion of the region. That being said, rain and even some snow showers were at least able to take hold in eastern KELO. We had a pretty sharp cutoff on radar this morning along the I-29 corridor, and in fact, we even saw this divide in Sioux Falls. The west side saw lower rain totals compared to the east before radar began to fill in over the course of the morning. Areas along and east of I
car breaks down. Protect yourself from the unprecedented.
Yeah, pretend.
There you go.
That's pumpkin.
Yeah, mine tastes like peanut butter and jelly.
Try the ranch, Jessica.
Good job, Lester Fixins.
I'm 77 years young, still going strong.
With the balance of nature, I can work just as hard and as
is professionally managed, and he gets
In terms of the information that you say that you're collecting or have collected and are going to share with...
But they named a puppy after me. Here's a little taste of it.
I want you to meet Dana, the little puppy Dana. Hi.
Then during the day tomorrow, we'll see the clouds thin out as we go through the afternoon hours as the system moves away. Sioux Falls with partly sunny skies during the afternoon. Not as windy as today. 51, 55 Aberdeen, 63 Pierre, windy, 64 degrees in Rapid City. The rest of the forecast is coming up. KELOLAND News starts now.
Live from KELOLAND Media Group, KELOLAND News at 5.
There's another pop-up grocery store here in downtown Sioux Falls. We'll tell you the meaning behind it tonight on KELOLAND News.
Plus, a second South Dakota teacher is honored with a big award. We'll take you to Brookings coming up.
Good evening. The combination of rising gas prices, inflation, and a sluggish economy is hitting a lot of families hard in the pocketbook.
Now, one way some people are trying to save money is by shopping at a pop-up grocery store. KELOLAND's Don Jorgensen joins us with the story.
Well, if you have never heard of a pop-up grocery store, it's where a local grocer packs up all of its food at its main facilities and then brings it to a new location in order to better serve the people. And the good news is it's usually marked down at a discount price.
My boss came in, she says, you've got to check out this pop-up across the way. And so
Norma Spanton came shopping here today at the Multicultural Center because the last time she shopped here, she found some great deals on food that she would normally buy at a regular grocery store.
I, in fact, had boxes. I bet you I had 5 boxes last month, and I spent $45 on 5 huge boxes full of groceries.
The pop-up is put on by Fair Market that offers all types of groceries at half price. They even have some products like eggs to give away for free that were donated by local businesses. A lot of people are finding it's a great way to save money, especially with inflation at a 40-year high. It's having a ripple effect on family budgets.
The Multicultural Center reached out with the idea initially and said, hey, we've got a space. What if you brought groceries to the space and maybe we can make this work? And then also we have the clinic next door. And then there's just a lot of foot traffic downtown.
This is the second pop-up that the Fair Market has done here at the Multicultural Center. They hope to do it once a month because the idea is to bring the product to the people.
Gas is expensive right now, you know, to get yourself to the food. And yeah, so we're bringing it to them.
And last month they served about 200 customers, and you still have time. The pop-up runs until 5:30 tonight.
Developing in Western KELOLAND tonight, just minutes ago, a Rapid City group filed a class action lawsuit against a local hotel after an owner posted racist comments on social media. The federal courthouse was the final stop during a march against racism this afternoon. People decided to take a stand after the owner of the Grand Gateway Hotel wrote that she wouldn't allow Native Americans to enter the business following a weekend shooting. City, county, and business entities joined the tribal members in condemning the ban. Rapid City posted on its Facebook page saying the statements are wrong, harmful, and hurtful, not only to Native Americans, but also to Rapid City citizens, businesses, and the community at large. KELOLAND's Sydney Thorson is at the march and talks with the Rapid City Mayor and the Cheyenne River Tribal Chairman. We'll hear from them coming up at 6. We'll also let you know about the latest statement from the hotel owner. Now, the shooting referenced by the Grand Gateway Hotel happened early Saturday morning. 19-year-old Quincy Bearrobe is currently in jail, charged with aggravated assault and committing a felony with a firearm. Bearrobe is accused of shooting another man who was having an argument with his girlfriend.
Well, turning to weather now, still cold.
Yes. From Kyiv had been killed.
We listen bombing attack right now. It can be more.
It is the southern city of Mariupol that has come under perhaps the most brutal Russian assault. Drone video showing a shattered coastal town where local officials say more than 2,000 people have been killed, and President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says a quarter of the population is trapped. Buildings destroyed, machinery on fire. It's the end, the man filming says. The Pentagon says Mariupol has come under fire from Russian ships off the coast. This video, shot in Crimea, shows Russian cruise missiles being fired from ships in the Black Sea toward Ukraine. All the death and destruction by Russia in Mariupol and beyond adding up to war crimes, the U.S. now officially declaring on Wednesday.
We have all seen really horrific images and accounts from the extensive and unrelenting attacks on civilians and civilian sites being conducted by Russian forces in Ukraine.
And in another blow to Putin, Anatoly Shubayas, a Russian government insider for decades, is leaving his job, according to Russian state news agency TASS. Reuters is reporting that Shubayas had left Russia and did not plan to return. This is the highest profile Russian official to quit since the war began. Alex Marquardt, CNN at the State Department.
Alex, thank you. Now to President Biden. He's here in Brussels at a pivotal moment for him and for the NATO alliance as they work to try to stand up to Putin. Our senior White House correspondent, Phil Mattingly, is traveling with the president. Phil, shortly before President Biden actually touched down here in Brussels, the U.S. declared that Russian forces have committed war crimes in Ukraine. Give us the latest.
Yeah, Wolf, it's the timing that just underscores the urgency of this moment, the high stakes that President Biden faces when he launches into 3 separate serious meetings with European officials over the course of the day tomorrow. And in that formal declaration, Secretary of State Antony Blinken said, quote, "Today I can announce that based on information currently available, the U.S. government assesses that members of Russia's forces have committed war crimes in Ukraine." Now, both President Biden and Secretary Blinken said over the course of the last week that they believed Ukraine had committed war crimes, but this official and formal announcement came based on both public information and intelligence assessments and underscores that very real concern, which is only growing out of concern of escalations. In this case, the use of chemical weapons, something U.S. officials have raised alarm about over the course of the last several days, and President Biden told our colleague Jeremy Diamond this morning before leaving for Brussels was a very real threat. Take a listen.
Mr. President, how concerned are you about the threat of chemical warfare right now, that Russia would use chemical weapons? How high is that threat?
I think it's a real threat. And that's not just the U.S. perspective, Wolf. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg also talked about the threat of chemical weapons use earlier today. It will be a subject of discussion during the meetings, the NATO meeting tomorrow, and it will be part of a wide-ranging effort to both address what has escalated over the course of the last 4 weeks in Ukraine, but also try and ensure that there are new efforts to ramp up the pressure on President Vladimir Putin from the alliance that has come together and stuck together over the course of this month-long military action, and it will attempt to impose even more costs over the course of the next day or two, Wolf. It's the goal of the U.S. officials. They believe there will be outcomes, but they also understand this is a long process and a war that doesn't show any signs of abating anytime soon, Wolf.
Phil Mattingly reporting for us. Phil's here in Brussels as well. Also tonight, a senior U.S. defense official says Ukrainian forces have pushed Russian troops back to the east of Kyiv. Our senior international correspondent, Sam Kiley, is in the Ukrainian capital for us. Sam, tell us more, first of all, about the battle for Kyiv that's underway right now.
Well, Wolf, in the last 48 or longer hours, the last 3 days effectively, there's been very heavy fighting indeed in the northwest of the country, of the capital, and in the absolute west, in the due west. There've been a lot of heavy use of multiple rocket launching systems. One went off very loud reports of multiple use of these artillery, almost certainly outgoing from the Ukrainians towards the city or in the environment of Irpin. Now, Irpin has fallen to the government forces, or rather been retaken as part of this counteroffensive that they launched more than a week ago. There have been 2 36-hour curfews to get people off the streets in the capital city to make room for these military maneuvers that, as far as the Ukrainians are concerned, are going their way. They also say that in the east of the city, and when I arrived here more than 2 weeks ago now, the concern was there was going to be a push in from that direction by the Russians. The Ukrainians are now saying they pushed the Russians back to as far as 70 kilometers outside the city. We've got no independent verification for that, but we do have these images of ferocious fighting. Those images you're looking at the moment coming from the east of the city. Very, very intense fighting conducted there by a Muslim militia group that's part of the Ukrainian armed forces. Wolf?
Sam Kiley in Kyiv for us. Sam, stay safe over there. We will be in touch. Just ahead, much more on Russia's war against Ukraine and how NATO forces are now beefing up troops deployed to defend the NATO alliance. And we'll also look back on Madeleine Albright's legacy with former President Bill Clinton, who chose her to become the first woman to serve as the U.S. Secretary of State. Former President Clinton standing by to join us. That's next. We're live here in Brussels, and you're in the Situation Room.
Solid path to a
high energy light.
Special ingredient. Somebody argues to the court that there's been a violation of the due process clause of the Constitution. It is within the role of the court to determine what that means, whether the person is correct that what happened with respect to their case violated the due process clause. And so there's an interpretive function that is a part of the judicial function.
Here, let me see if I can put a finer point on this. It's not the right so much. It's how the right is created. That's why I asked you yesterday whether you think that these unenumerated, unmentioned rights ought to be decided by the people through their elected representatives versus the federal judiciary. Let's take two rights that I talked about yesterday, the right to assisted suicide, the right of a transgender woman to participate in women's sports. I can see how, I'm not predicting that it will, but I can see how the court, either through the due process clause or the Ninth Amendment, could find those rights in the Constitution. As we talked about yesterday, the Supreme Court looks to me like they've adopted the policy of there is no test for a fundamental right. There are several tests. And in Obergefell, Justice Kennedy cited with approval Justice Harlan's dissent in Poe v. Ullman, which says there's no test. We go case by case. And but I know there are tests, like I'll get the language here somewhere. I've got it. I don't want to look it up, but implicit in the concept of ordered liberty, and you've talked about that. Here's a new one that Justice Kennedy talked about.
Human nature. In 1993, President Clinton named her U.S. ambassador to the UN. She quickly became known for her charm, also her fierceness. She convinced Clinton to launch NATO airstrikes in Bosnia in 1995, pushed UN Secretary General Boutros Ghali from office, sanctioned Saddam Hussein's regime, and weighed in after Cuba's military shot down 2 civilian aircraft.
Frankly, this is not cojones. This is cowardice.
In 1997, she became Secretary of State, the highest-ranking woman in the U.S. government.
The American people will benefit from her leadership and her ability to speak to them about the importance of our being strong abroad in order to have a strong, good life here at home.
As secretary, she visited nearly 100 countries, meeting with counterparts, all male. She never relinquished her feminine flair.
Usually Madeleine does the talking. Once in a while, she lets her jewelry do the talking.
A poem appeared in the Iraqi newspaper that called me an unparalleled serpent. And since I had a snake pin already, I thought I'd wear it whenever we talked about Iraq.
One of her last acts as Secretary of State, traveling to North Korea in 2000 to negotiate with Kim Jong-il. Her groundbreaking accomplishments earned her the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2012. She had this famous adage, there's a special place in hell for women who don't help each other, and she really lived by that, championing women in the field of U.S. foreign policy. She inspired my own career, giving me my start in Washington, hiring me first for an internship and then later for a job. Brett?
Great to hear, Jillian. Thank you. Madeleine Albright also taught a foreign service class at Georgetown University, and wherever she was traveling around the world, she tried to make that Monday class every week. President Bush said of Albright, she lived out the American dream and helped others realize it. President Obama said it's because of people like Madeleine that the story of America is ultimately one of hope. Madeleine Albright was 84 years old.
A moment in that same colloquy where Senator Graham actually said about viewing porn, maybe you don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's a horrible thing, as though he was somehow associating her with the idea that maybe viewing porn isn't so bad. I mean, he just huffed off after his questioning yesterday and today, stormed out of the room in a fury, and it is, as you say, kind of paradoxical that women are supposed to be the emotional ones, and she's sitting there poker-faced. But I want to say one other thing that I think is important. Just keep your eye on this child predator stuff, because not only does it hook up the QAnon, not only does it hook up to sort of Comet Pizza and that kind of stuff, this is really, really a valence of political discourse now meant to suggest that all progressives are child pornographers, and this has a long, ugly tail, and I really fear that it's sowing the seeds of something to seriously not just delegitimize Judge Jackson in these hearings, but to delegitimize her as a justice for decades to come.
Yeah, you just connected several dots, including the very horrific Comet Pizza event where an online conspiracy theory led someone to go physically attack. Again, who's anti-crime here? If you're anti-crime, you'd be against those kind of physical attacks that put Americans' lives in danger, that at the time was considered very fringe. Now you have actual QAnon candidates, you have some QAnon supporters in Congress, and this whole idea that there's this, it's a conspiracy theory that we actually have a guest to get into on it next. So it's interesting you raised it because it overlaps, and it really speaks to the other part of this. There's the racist part, there's the gender dynamics, then there's some other stuff that is enough below the surface that if you're just watching this hearing without all of that other knowledge, and by the way, who wants all that other knowledge? How much time do you have to spend memorizing QAnon theories? It might not exactly make sense until you connect those dots. So Dahlia, thank you very much. Maya is coming back on the program tonight. We have a lot more on Judge Jackson, as I mentioned, including that breakdown on conspiracy theories. But right now, I also want to update you on the story abroad, the war. Late today, the president arrived in Brussels. This is an emergency NATO meeting that he attended. He'll announce more sanctions on Russia's parliament, as well as a plan to increase the U.S. troop presence in Eastern Europe. Again, a way to try to support the Zelenskyy mission and resistance without committing to boots on the ground inside Ukraine. The United States also is formally declaring that Russia is committing war crimes.
The U.S. government assesses that Russia's forces are committing war crimes in Ukraine. We have all seen really horrific images and accounts from the extensive and unrelenting attacks on civilians and civilian sites. Those who are responsible for such abuses must be held accountable.
But what does holding Russians accountable mean, especially given the United States historically has opposed some of the very international courts that would try war criminals? Well, perhaps the policy is changing under the pressure of this war. We will see. It's something we've interviewed some U.S. officials about on this program. Meanwhile, what many are calling the stalemate portion of this war is grinding on with scenes like this, Russia bombing the capital from afar. Their troops are reportedly stalled in many parts of Ukraine.
Мы были в спальне, я в кресле сидела, смотрела телевизор. Когда это бахнуло, выскочила в кухню. А там уже все, окна вылетели, дым, гарь. Уже комнаты все, я ничего не могла ни взять, ни это, бегом выскочили.
In one southern city, there is footage that appears to show civilians having to fight off tear gas. NATO estimates between 7,000 and 15,000 Russian troops have been killed so far. That's a wide variance, but either way, a very high death toll. And they also have reason to believe 40,000 Russians have been injured, captured, or are currently MIA. President Zelensky spoke to the French parliament today, pleading for more military aid and support. That's the update on the war. We have more of that later this hour. But as I mentioned, after this brief break, we turn back not only to the Supreme Court hearing, but why so many Republicans are in hot water for the way they've gone on the attack. And guess who's here? Elie Mystal. He is known as a natural shot of espresso, but he's been caffeinating extra all week. And he's here live after this short break.
About to focus on how long she had to live or didn't have to live, because she knew she was getting good care and she couldn't do anything about that. She spent the entire conversation talking about how Ukraine had to be defended, and that we had put the lie to those who said we made a mistake to expand NATO. She said, you know, they're not going after NATO yet, and that the Ukrainians had clearly proved that they didn't want to be part of Russia, and the idea that Putin was trying to sell the argument that a country with a Jewish president was actually a Nazi country was patently absurd, and she just wanted to support whatever we could do to back Ukraine, and that's all she wanted to talk about. She was happy, she was upbeat, and she didn't want to venture in to her health challenges. She said, I'm being treated, I'm doing the best I can. The main thing we can all do now is to think about the world we want to leave for our kids.
I know that Madeleine Albright once attended a naturalization ceremony and remarked, and this quote always stuck out with me when she said, and I'm quoting her now, "Only in America could a refugee from Central Europe become Secretary of State." Mr. President, how does that resonate with you as Europe is now facing the greatest refugee crisis since World War II?
Well, I feel the same way Madeleine does. I think that we owe it to the Ukrainians to support them. The biggest Ukrainian diasporas are in the United States and Canada, and they have done very well here. I went a couple of weeks ago, I was down playing golf and with my friend Governor McAuliffe in Florida, and when we came up to the course, the person that greeted me when I got out was Wayne Gretzky, maybe the greatest hockey player in history, a Ukrainian Canadian. I think that we all need to help them. They'll make them, if their country prevails, and in the end I think they will if we all hang tough and give them the support they need, then they'll want to go home. And if it doesn't work out, we'll be enriched by having them in the United States and wherever else they choose to go. They're incredibly gifted people, and as we see, they're very strong-willed and resolute.
They are indeed. I know many of them myself, and it's a horrible situation that's going on right now. Mr. President, thanks so much for joining us, spending a few months to talk about Madeleine Albright, a wonderful, wonderful woman and a great American. Thanks once again for joining us.
Thanks. She was a national treasure. Thanks for giving me a chance to say it.
Thank you. We'll continue these conversations, hopefully down the road. Coming up, we're going to break down the chilling message, very chilling message, from Vladimir Putin's chief spokesman, who, get this, who actually refused to rule out using Russia's nuclear weapons in Ukraine. Much more of our live coverage from here in Brussels right after a quick break.
Well, the sun is shining and the grass is green. I'm way ahead of schedule with my trusty team.
A few light snow showers east of I-29. Overnight tonight, we'll keep the north wind blowing, maybe not quite as hard as right now. Lows upper 20s to around 30. Lots of clouds along and east of I-29. Not so much.
We've had so much support, especially in town here. You know, the people that know Chloe and know us. You know, and then different things. We've had friends come over and put things on we have a little carport that they put different signage on that.
And while the run by the Coyotes has been fun, to those here, it hasn't been surprising.
Chloe is a better
person than she is a player. You know, she always had time for anything and everything, and she was involved in everything here. So, you know, it doesn't surprise me.
In Oneida, Austin Goss, Dakota News Now.
And a reminder, our Cooper Seamer is going back on the road with the USD women. He'll be with the Coyotes as they face Michigan this Saturday in Wichita. That game tips off at 5:30. You can watch it on ESPN2. And be sure to follow Cooper on Twitter for updates.
Tyler has one more check on the evening forecast when we come back.
Monster card?
Decides to exclude the APA when it's saying, I'm giving you discretion, but you can do this arbitrarily, you can do it however you want. And in other places in the immigration statute that sets up expedited removal, Congress says, we are excluding the APA. We're telling you that with respect to this kind of discretion, the APA doesn't apply. So here I had these two statutes, and there are canons of statutory interpretation that says that you should try to give effect to all of the will of Congress. You should try to read statutes so that they go together in a way if you have these two directives. And there's also D.C. Circuit case law.
Judge, I got to stop you.
All right.
Because I got it.
And let me just say, I agree that the D.C. Circuit reversed me. They disagreed with my interpretation, and that's the way that our system works.
Let me ask this last question. This is a question about based on your experience. Can we agree that if, I want to emphasize if, cocaine is cocaine, that crack cocaine is equal in its danger to powdered cocaine? You with me?
I think so.
One is not more dangerous than the other. If that's true, then the sentencing rules ought to be the same. Okay?
It's a policy matter for Congress. You could make them differently if you wanted to.
This is what I want to ask you.
Yeah.
Based on your experience, you've been on the bench a decade.
Yes.
Is crack cocaine more dangerous than powdered or less or the same?
Senator, that's a policy determination. That's what policymakers do. They look at the evidence related to these things and they decide what's more dangerous.
But what have you seen?
What should... I have seen evidence through the Sentencing Commission that the two compositions are chemically similar, so similar as to be indistinguishable. And the Commission, for very many years, as a policy-making body, indicated its view that they should be equivalent and lobbied Congress concerning that. And Congress made a determination about, in the policy realm, making it 18-1 instead of 100-1, which is what it had previously been.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Kennedy. And now Senator Padilla.
Mr. Chairman, before I begin, I know you're being very mindful of the clock, so I just want to say I have two initial, more substantive questions, and then I think two very brief questions, but are very important. So I'll get right to it. Judge Jackson, I am so glad that you take some pride in sharing your family's story, as you should. I know I take pride in sharing mine. My colleagues have heard it, but I never get tired of reminding folks that I am the proud son of immigrants. My parents came to the United States from Mexico decades ago, and through their hard work and determination, they raised three of us. My sister, my brother, and I, we all attended and graduated from college, and we've all found successful careers in public service. Now, it's a story that is shared by hardworking immigrant families across the country. And over the course of generations, families who work diligently each day to create a better life and to contribute to the country. Whether it's as farm workers, short order cooks, celebrity chefs, software engineers, or tech CEOs, as school custodians, teachers, principals, whether they're documented or undocumented. People who migrate to this country seeking asylum, seeking refuge, or a shot at the American dream, all deserve to be treated with dignity and humanity. Now, unfortunately, our laws and our courts don't always do that. Beyond our often cruel and counterproductive choices that we've made over the years when it comes to immigration policy, the language that we use to speak about immigrants can often have dehumanizing effects. For example, in the Immigration and Nationality Act, it's replete with references to quote-unquote aliens. And court opinions written by federal judges across the country can be found referring to undocumented persons as, quote, illegal aliens. Now, I know NASA has put a man on the moon, and there are billionaires increasingly exploring space. But let's be clear, no person is an alien, and no human being can be illegal. So with that context, I read your immigration-related decisions on the district court with great interest. Now, beyond the substance of your opinions, what stood out to me is that you seem to have tried to avoid making the same choice as many of your predecessors and many of your colleagues. When not quoting statutes or precedent, your opinions appear not to refer to immigrants as alien or illegal. Instead, use terms such as undocumented and non-citizen. I hope that was a conscious choice. The language we use and the language our courts use to describe people, whether immigrants, the formerly incarcerated, individuals who identify as LGBTQ, or other historically marginalized people, really matters a great deal. Our language matters. It's exactly for that reason that 6 years ago, Congress passed a bill to remove derogatory and offensive references to Black Americans, Asian Americans, and Native Americans from the U.S. Code. And it's why last year President Biden ordered the Customs and Border Protection Agency and ICE to stop referring to migrants as illegal immigrants. With all that said, Judge Jackson, do you agree that the language we use to describe one another and the language used by the bench matters?
Thank you, Senator. As I mentioned earlier in this hearing, judges are the only branch of government who are required to write our opinions, to explain our decisions. And I have long believed in that capacity that our clarity and language matters. We're explaining the law to people, and people read and understand what the law is, what the rule of law is in this country through the opinions of judges. So they do matter, language.
Thank you. Now I want to discuss with you an issue of law and technology, an issue previously raised by Senator Ossoff earlier today, and I'm excited to talk to you about this topic. Just as an aside, any day that an MIT engineer gets to question a Harvard lawyer, it's a good day. So thank you for indulging. But as you know, the Supreme Court only hears a tiny fraction of all federal appeals. That means that the cases that get to the Supreme Court are typically either new questions of law or very difficult questions of law. And I think the intersection of
at least 100,000 civilians without food or water as Russia intensifies its efforts to pound the city into submission. In Chernihiv, Russian bombs obliterated this bridge. cutting off the main escape route for civilians fleeing the horror. And in the country's second largest city of Kharkiv, the historical center came under attack. And yet, in the face of what the US government now formally calls Russian war crimes, Ukrainians remain defiant. The biggest prize, Kyiv, is under daily attack. Today, another residential area was hit.
It was many bombs.
But Russia has suffered heavy losses. NATO estimates 7,000 to 15,000 of their men have been killed in action. And now they've been pushed back from Irpin, just outside the capital, which has been the scene of some of the fiercest battles, forcing thousands to run for their lives. In an underground bar turned bunker, we met some of the men fighting there. Among them, a 26-year-old American from Cincinnati who goes by the name Fava.
It's something that's going to be in the history books to kind of feel like I need to be part of it.
And part of it, he is, serving in a special forces unit where they see regular combat.
So you're willing to give up your life for another country far away from home?
Yeah.
Why?
I was kind of born to fight, so might as well fight for something worth fighting for.
He's not alone. There are reportedly at least 3,000 Americans who've signed up to fight here, and they're among the 20,000 foreigners from around the world, despite the U.S. warning Americans to stay away. Nora?
Deborah Pata in Kyiv tonight. Thank you. Let's turn now to that emergency NATO summit. CBS News has learned that some of the first weapons from that $800 million aid package have arrived. And despite Putin's threats to supply routes, the Defense Department says it's not having trouble getting U.S. equipment into Ukraine. CBS's Ed O'Keefe reports from Brussels.
President Biden arrived in Brussels this evening for the emergency NATO summit. Its mission, ramping up pressure on Vladimir Putin to stop the brutal siege of Ukraine. There are growing concerns the conflict could get worse. The head of the NATO alliance today discussing fears of a chemical or biological attack.
Any use of chemical weapons would totally change the nature of the conflict.
President Biden also acknowledged that possibility.
I think it's a real threat.
NATO announced it's doubling troop deployments on the eastern flank, sending 4 new battle groups to Bulgaria, Hungary, Romania, and Slovakia. Ukrainian leader Volodymyr ZELENSKYY is scheduled to address the summit tomorrow, his latest plea for help on the global stage. The country's NATO ambassador told us today they expect more military support to be announced.
We are not naive. We know that there would be no NATO troops on our land, but military support, practical support, I mean financial, humanitarian, can come also from NATO member states. And if this is the result of tomorrow's summit, we will be absolutely satisfied.
So in essence, his message to NATO is do more and do it faster.
Absolutely.
Another key item on the agenda, additional economic penalties on Russia. The president and other leaders expected to announce new sanctions against hundreds of members of Russia's parliament. And there's news tonight on Brittany Griner, that WNBA player detained in Russia on drug possession charges. The State Department says a U.S. official was able to see her this week for the first time since she was detained in February. She's in good condition, and the State Department says it'll be closely monitoring her case. Nora?
Ed O'Keefe, thank you. And back here in the U.S., there is now a state of emergency in effect tonight for New Orleans and the surrounding areas, devastated by a series of tornadoes late last night, including one with winds topping at least 136 miles per hour. The storm system is now threatening more than 22 million people from the southeast to the Ohio River Valley. CBS's David Begnaud is in hard-hit Arabi.
It was only after dawn that the true impact could be seen.
Meetings.
Cecilia Vega live in Brussels. Will be on the air together tomorrow. Cecilia, we'll see you then. We reported at the top here about Russian troops now on the defensive outside the capital of Kyiv, being pushed back now by Ukrainian forces. So I want to bring in our chief global affairs correspondent, Martha Raddatz, tonight. She's live in Warsaw. And Martha, I know you've been talking with your sources. First of all, what do we know about these setbacks for the Russians, Putin's state of mind at this point? And how concerned are U.S. authorities about military supplies coming right here through Poland to get to Ukraine, the safety of those supply lines?
Well, David, a U.S. official tells me tonight that Putin remains erratic and angry given the fact his ground forces have been performing so poorly. The U.S. official said that eastern Ukraine is now littered with the charred remains of Russian tanks. Those anti-tank weapons we've been giving the Ukrainians have been very effective. And there is concern about those supply chains. And one of the reasons I am told by this official is that once those convoys reach Ukraine, the supplies are dispersed so quickly that it would be hard to hit them. So the Russians may try to strike on the Poland side of the border before the supplies get to Ukraine. David?
All right, Martha Raddatz on the concerns tonight. Martha, thank you. Our coverage of the war in Ukraine for tonight. But we do move on here to the emotional moment playing out just a short time ago in the historic Supreme Court hearing for Supreme Court nominee Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, wiping away tears after supportive words from Senator Cory Booker. Judge Jackson all day facing Republicans' fierce questioning. They spent much of their time asking about child pornography and sentencing. How Judge Jackson responded and that moment that brought tears. ABC's Rachel Scott live on the Hill tonight.
Tonight, Senate Republicans again going after this historic nominee, almost singularly focused on Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson's sentencing record for people convicted of possessing or sharing child pornography. For the second day in a row, Texas Senator Ted Cruz ticking through individual cases.
I've taken every case seriously. These are very horrible
I'm asking you specifically about the Hess case.
I've taken every case seriously.
So you're not going to answer that?
These are very horrible crimes, as was that one. And as a mother, having to look at these pictures, having to follow Congress's directive, having to listen to recommendations like the government in that case, I imposed the sentence that I believed was the sentence that was required by law.
Jackson clearly frustrated.
Senator, no one case can stand in for a judge's entire sentencing record. I've sentenced more than 100 people. You have 8 or 9 cases in that chart.
Okay, Judge, you said that before. These are the 8 or 9 child porn cases. I will say, to correct the record,
I just say to the judge, there's no point in responding. He's going to interrupt you.
Thank you.
The Republican attacks on Judge Jackson are misleading. According to the U.S. Sentencing Commission, just 30% of people convicted of viewing or sharing child pornography are sentenced within the federal guidelines. The majority have received lesser sentences from judges nominated by both parties. That includes nearly a dozen federal judges nominated by President Trump and confirmed by Senate Republicans. Republican Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri has voted for at least 3 of them. But still, he spent his entire questioning focusing on child pornography. 30 minutes yesterday and another 20 today, going case by case.
Judge, you gave him 3 months. My question is, do you regret it or not?
Senator, what I regret is that in a hearing about my qualifications to be a justice on the Supreme Court, we've spent a lot of time focusing on this small subset of my sentences.
The conservative National Review denouncing Hawley's attacks as meritless to the point of demagoguery. And some Republican senators put off by the focus on child pornography. It struck me that it was off course, said Mitt Romney. There's no there. Nearing the end of a grueling day, Democratic Senator Cory Booker bringing Judge Jackson to tears, telling her she had more than earned her Supreme Court nomination.
You did not get there because of some left-wing agenda? You didn't get here because of some dark money groups? You got here how every black woman in America who's gotten anywhere has done, by being like Ginger Rogers said, I did everything Fred Astaire did, but backwards in heels. But don't worry, my sister, don't worry. God has got you. And how do I know that? Because you're here. And I know what it's taken for you to sit in that seat.
And Rachel Scott joins us live from the Hill tonight. And Rachel, President Biden today praising Judge Jackson's intellect and her grace in these hearings.
Yes, and David, the White House says the president was impressed by how Judge Jackson dismantled those conspiracy theories. These hearings have been emotional and intense. And so tonight, you had senators, members of Jackson's family, wiping tears from their eyes as Senator Booker reminded the nation of the history being made in that room. David?
Rachel Scott on the Hill again tonight. Thank you, Rachel. Next tonight, here to the deadly tornado outbreak in the South. More than 60 reported tornadoes across 5 states, at least 2 killed, many more injured. A deadly tornado hitting New Orleans. ABC's Will Carr in the storm zone tonight.
The frightening scene unfolding just after dark. That deadly storm system unleashing a second night of violent tornadoes. This terrifying twister touching down near the eastern edge of New Orleans.
Oh my goodness, that is a significant tornado on the ground, guys.
Neighborhoods in St. Bernard Parish taking a direct hit. Daylight revealing the scale of the destruction.
The National Weather Service says this was at least an EF3 tornado with winds of more than 135 miles per hour, strong enough to pick that home up and toss it into the street with the family inside.
James Burke and his family, including his 22-year-old daughter Maria, who uses a wheelchair and a ventilator, were inside.
And you're just spinning around?
And it's spinning. The house, I feel like the house is spinning like that. That's why my wife fly inside, and I'll fly too.
Maria taken to the hospital, expected to be okay. With all of the destruction, Louisiana's governor declaring a state of emergency, calling up the National Guard to assist in the cleanup.
That powerful system is now moving to the north and the east, and there's still the threat of more tornadoes. We've already seen that the system can really pack a punch. David.
Really incredible, Will Carr. Thank you. And those storms now on the move, as Will just mentioned. Severe thunderstorm and tornado watches in effect from Florida all the way up to the Ohio Valley tonight. The system then moving into the northeast with heavy rain through the morning. To the pandemic tonight and the news millions of parents have been waiting for. News from Moderna on its vaccine for young children 5 years old and under. Here's Eva Pilgrim.
Tonight, promising news for millions of parents of young children waiting for a vaccine. Moderna says 2 doses tested in kids 6 months to 5 years old generated the strong antibody response also seen in adults.
The good news of the data today is that we now have a vaccine that in our hands, we believe, provides the same benefits to children as it does to adults.
At 1/4 the adult size, the vaccine was 44% effective at preventing symptomatic infection for 6-month to 2-year-olds and 38% effective in 2 to 5-year-olds. There were no hospitalizations or safety concerns.
None of the kids had any serious adverse events reported, which is extremely important out there for parents because safety risks is #1 when it comes to approving any vaccine or drug for kids.
This could be a major development. Eva, we know Moderna is planning to ask for emergency authorization coming up in the few weeks ahead. Next month, Pfizer expecting data on a 3rd vaccine shot in young children as well. But while we had you, we wanted to ask about this other new headline about what the CDC is now tracking on this Omicron subvariant in the U.S.
That's right, David. The CDC director saying they are carefully watching New England and New York City for that subvariant BA2. After seeing a small uptick in wastewater surveillance, they are starting to track some increases in cases and in some hospitalizations in those areas. David.
Eva Pilgrim with us tonight. Eva, thank you. We have learned tonight that the U.S. has lost a towering figure in American diplomacy. Former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, the first woman to ever hold that post. President Biden tonight calling her a force, saying hers were the hands that turned the tide of history. Late today, the family of former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright saying, "We are heartbroken to announce the 64th U.S. Secretary of State passed away. The cause was cancer. Madeleine Albright was the first woman to hold that position."
I, Madeleine Corbell Albright.
Taking the oath of office in 1997, chosen by President Bill Clinton.
Her story is the best of America's story, told with courage, compassion, and conviction.
She was unanimously confirmed by the Senate. Albright, a native of Prague, came to America as a refugee, and on that day she spoke of her parents and their early struggles overseas.
I stand here today in this office, which symbolizes the power and purpose of the United States. My mother and father taught me to love freedom. No barrier or ceiling should stop me from serving freedom in my own life.
Born in 1937, she and her family fled the Nazis and then Soviet-dominated Eastern Europe.
Madeleine Albright meeting with so many of the leaders of her time, in all of those meetings wearing her trademark pins, this one, the American flag. Once telling Barbara Walters what she most hoped to accomplish as Secretary of State.
Have the American people understand that foreign policy is domestic policy, that there is no line between foreign and domestic policy. We are part of a globe and we have to adjust to it, and America is still the best place in the world to live.
It was just 1 month ago, in what might have been her final work as this country's former chief diplomat, she wrote in the New York Times, Vladimir Putin is making a terrible mistake, saying Ukraine is entitled to its sovereignty no matter who its neighbors happen to be. If Mr. Putin feels backed into a corner, he has only himself to blame. Albright was the first senior U.S. official to meet Putin as acting president of Russia 22 years ago. Tonight, Madeleine Albright, in her own words, in her memoir on how she would like to be remembered.
I hope people will say that I did the best with what I was given, tried to make my parents proud, served my country with all the energy I had, and took a strong stand on the side of freedom. Perhaps some will also say that I helped teach a generation of older women to stand tall and young women not to be afraid to interrupt.
Tonight, former President Bill Clinton saying Hillary and I are profoundly saddened by the passing of Madeleine Albright. She was one of the finest secretaries of state. Few leaders have been so perfectly suited for the times in which they served. When we come back here tonight, news coming in on that Boeing 737 that plunged from the sky, and the U.S. basketball player being held in Russia, what we've learned about her tonight.
Wang Laboratories. And it was no coincidence, having been born and raised in Florida, that I moved one September because I couldn't bear another winter. But I've been in the technical field. I was working on IP, or Internet Protocol, before anybody knew what Internet Protocol was back in the early 90s. And I do think that we should go away and understand the threat. If you've seen the multiple of illicit activities, and for the purposes of this discussion, child pornography, now, imagine what it's going to be like 5 years from now. I was talking with someone in the hallway. They're taking a playbook from drug kingpins, the creators and the aggregators and the distributors are using technology, I think in some cases, to reach out to people and incent them to go to these websites, to infect their computers, to download thousands potentially from a single click. I think that we have to examine these criminal enterprises and put law enforcement resources into cutting the heads off of these people, figuratively speaking. And one of the ways you do that is to provide, I think, more ways to go about prosecute, more technology that we need to cut down the supply. But we still have to deal with the demand. And that's another area where these criminal organizations and others are taking advantage. And, you know, today, if you think about technology 10 years ago, it was a little odd, at least 15 years ago, to see a child. I've got two granddaughters. One is 4 years old, one is 2 years old. They're technologically savvy. As a matter of fact, I love talking to them on the phone, but even my 2-year-old knows how to deal with the filters to make me look like I've got rabbit ears and everything. They're technologically savvy. There's a real danger there that these horrible people, and I genuinely believe that you think they're horrible people, are going, they're going to infect and destroy a lot of lives. And so I don't know, is it with the Sentencing Commission? How would you, and incidentally, this is a toxic subject in Congress, because if you start talking about better understanding this, most people are going to run away from it. But we do it at the expense of destroying a lot of victims' lives. So I don't, unless you have ideas off the top of your head, I'm trying to get an idea of how we can make people understand. Maybe we could even have a discussion to say that the penalties today are the floor, to begin the discussion, just to simply eliminate people from making this so toxic that we don't better understand it and get ahead of it. But how can we even start having an intelligent discussion and a productive discussion where Congress is clearly going to need to act to do what I think everybody in this room wants to do, is just erase it from the planet of the earth, or at least make a lot of progress, because quite honestly, it has exponentially grown, and there are exponentially more victims today than there were even 10 years ago. Any ideas?
Thank you, Senator. I actually don't. I haven't been working on or looking at or dealing with sentencing policy for a long time now. In my work as a judge, we're looking at individual cases, not systems or crime organizations and policies related to them.
Yeah. Well, I think it's something that we should take seriously, and after we cool the temperatures and have people have legitimate concerns about some of the rulings, I think that we have to clear up some of the complexity and recognize that Congress is a part of the solution. Okay, now on the weighty subject of intellectual property, are you familiar with copyright preemption under Section 301A?
No, I haven't worked with that.
Okay. I wouldn't have expected you to necessarily, but, and I won't get into patent questions. We've got a lot of work that I think ultimately is going to require us getting rid of the shambles of jurisprudence that we have. It's a very complicated field. We've got
but the war would be over, the suffering would end, and the killing would end, and the Ukrainians could start to come home from those Eastern European countries now under such stress from the arrival of all those migrants. War winning, which we all would root for, of course, as the polling shows Americans are, that raises the stakes, I think, and raises a question for NATO.
You know, Katie, Jeff mentioned energy and the differences there in the NATO countries. Axios had an interesting story about Jamie Dimon pushing the administration on energy, calling for essentially a Marshall Plan. Dimon's call, JP Morgan obviously, for the federal government to assume a more aggressive posture on energy and climate is a clear signal the business community is looking to Washington for leadership, big, bold ideas on how to achieve energy security. He's calling for more liquefied natural gas facilities in Europe, reduced reliance on Russian imports, and investments in new technology like hydrogen and carbon capture. It doesn't seem like that is hitting a chord with the Biden administration, at least not yet on the oil and gas side.
Well, and it's not necessarily hitting a chord in the Russian economy either, when a lot of these sanctions don't necessarily target the oil and gas industry of Russia. But the Biden administration actually has options here to still be dedicated to their climate change agenda while also ramping up domestic production of natural gas. You'll remember that the United States of America, even when they came out of the Paris Climate Accord under President Trump, was able to cut emissions in half through this natural gas revolution, because it is a clean way of producing energy. And so the administration has the ability to dive in with these oil companies who they have demonized to get the ball rolling, not only just to domestic production for Americans who are seeing their prices go sky high, but also on the national security front and the capability of exporting that energy to partners who are not necessarily aggressive towards the United States, but who are allies in this fight against Russia and backing Ukraine. But they do have this issue of their climate change agenda, which has been running the show from the White House in terms of what their policies are of energy production here at home, by limiting leasing, by going after the oil and gas companies and propping up this idea that natural gas can't be part of the broader conversation about how to get to cleaner alternative energy.
Britt, 64th Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, first female Secretary of State, died today, according to her family. Your thoughts of her life and legacy, what she leaves behind?
A very accomplished woman, a very strong person, and she belonged to a long line of American foreign policy officials and experts who believed that American foreign policy consisted of diplomacy backed by the threat of force. And she famously, in a meeting during her tenure as Secretary of State, said to Colin Powell, General Colin Powell, what is the good of having all this great military if we can't use it? That was a tradition that was carried on for a long time. She was there before 9/11, and that means before Afghanistan and before Iraq, and before the doubts that have so strongly set in about the use of American military force were present. But that's what she was for, and I don't think she ever changed her mind about it. She was quite a person.
Yeah, and Jeff, quickly, one of those pictures there was meeting with Kim Jong-il in North Korea, the first American diplomat to meet in person. Leaves a big legacy behind.
She was, and she's a trailblazer for women in addition to the diplomatic efforts that she undertook.
All right, panel.
Chronic kidney disease by talking to your doctor and ask.
With decisions from judges around the country. But Republicans have not found that reasoning satisfactory, continuing to press their belief that Jackson is, quote, soft on crime.
There's at least a level of empathy that enters into your treatment of a defendant that some could view as a maybe beyond what some of us would be comfortable with respect to administering justice.
Jackson shot back that she sentences in a way that is tough but also compassionate, and later she turned emotional.
You faced insults here that were shocking to me. Well, actually not shocking. Don't worry, my sister. Don't worry. God has got you. And how do I know that? Because you're here.
And this could ultimately come down to one of the closest confirmation votes in history, though, of course, Democrats do have just enough votes on their own to make it happen. Wolf.
Jessica Schneider reporting for us. Thank you very much, Jessica. I'll be back tomorrow here in Brussels for another special Situation Room. We'll be live from Brussels beginning at 5 p.m. Eastern. Aaron Burnett on Front starts.
Public office.
Tonight, our special coverage from Brussels as President Biden arrives for a high-stakes NATO summit, and the U.S. formally accuses Russia of committing war crimes in Ukraine. New images of destruction in Mariupol after nearly a month of fighting. The toll growing on both sides. NATO estimating as many as 15,000 Russian troops have been killed. President Biden set to meet with fellow NATO leaders here in Brussels at what he may announce about U.S. troops in the region. Also tonight, the deadly tornado, at least an EF3, tearing through the New Orleans area. The governor declaring a state of emergency. More than 60 tornadoes reported over 48 hours. Where the threat is headed tonight. Moderna announcing it will ask the FDA to authorize its COVID vaccine for children under 6. How well does it protect young kids? And how soon could they get their shots? The final day of questioning for Supreme Court nominee Ketanji Brown Jackson. Her tense exchange with Republican Lindsey Graham over child pornography. And the case involving race, Jackson says she'll recuse herself from. And remembering the first woman to serve as U.S. Secretary of State. The tributes pouring in tonight for Madeleine Albright.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt. Reporting tonight from Brussels.
Good evening from Brussels, everyone, where tonight President Biden and fellow NATO leaders are gathering for tomorrow's emergency summit on the war in Ukraine. They're looking for ways to help Ukraine and create more pain for Vladimir Putin. The alliance preparing to increase troop levels along NATO's eastern flank, deploying 4 new battle groups in Bulgaria, Hungary, Romania, and Slovakia as a check on further Russian ambitions. Tonight, the U.S. formally accusing Russia of committing war crimes in Ukraine, citing available evidence. Russian forces have now closed in on cities on the outskirts of Kyiv. The mayor of Kyiv says 264 civilians there have been killed, while NATO officials estimate that as many as 15,000 Russian troops have died in the first month of the war. Both numbers impossible to know for sure. A lot to cover tonight, and we begin with Richard Engel.
Drone footage released by local Ukrainian fighters shows the aftermath of what looks like carpet bombing inside Mariupol. Similar attacks on homes, hospitals, and schools led the U.S. State Department today to assess Russian forces have committed war crimes. This morning, Russia fired more missiles at Kyiv, destroying apartments and trying to spread fear. But the people of this city refuse to bow down.
Russia has significantly intensified its attacks in and around Kyiv over the last 24 hours, leaving more and more homes across the city like this one. Barbara, a resident and volunteer, said Russia has already bombed this area 4 times. But it's not helping Russia's advance. In a government building in Kyiv, 2 of the capital's top security officials monitor a real-time battle map, unclassified, that shows Russian troops are losing territory around Kyiv. The red areas are under Russian occupation. The blue areas are new territory. Ukrainian forces say they've recaptured in the last 48 hours, much of it in the last 24 hours. It's not just that the Russians don't have gas or other means to fight, but it's the actions of the Ukrainian army that led to destroying their lines of communication, so they can't replenish their food, fuel, and other equipment, said Serhiy Knyazyev, the city's police and military advisor.
Have you ever seen something like this before during the course of this war? Is this the most blue areas that you've had?
We haven't seen such big territorial gains in the outskirts of Kyiv, he said.
1 month on, Russia's war looks increasingly like a fiasco. And according to a new NATO estimate, as many as 15,000 Russian troops have been killed so far. And it sounds like it could be another long night here in Kyiv.
That mournful sound. All right, Richard, thank you for that. Late tonight, President Biden arriving here in Brussels for that emergency NATO summit. Chief White House correspondent Kristen Welker joins me now. What are we expecting to hear from the president and the others?
Well, Lester, good evening to you. President Biden is under a lot of pressure since the West's actions against Vladimir Putin, including significant sanctions, have not stopped his invasion so far. And earlier, the president acknowledged there's a, quote, real threat. Putin may use chemical weapons. At the summit, the president and allies will announce more sanctions and aid. And NBC News has learned the president may also announce the U.S. plans to indefinitely maintain an increased number of U.S. troops deployed to NATO countries. Ukraine's President Zelenskyy is expected to address the group virtually and again plead for more help. And as the refugee crisis mounts, President Biden will end his trip with a stop in Poland. Lester, a lot at stake.
All right, Kristen, good to have you with us tonight. A different kind of devastation back home. Deadly tornadoes in the south, and it may not be over. Tornado watches now in parts of Florida, Georgia, Ohio, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Kentucky. Sam Brock is near New Orleans, where the scope of the damage is immense. Sam?
Lester, immense but concentrated here in Arabi, where the tornado's path was only a couple of blocks wide, but a few miles long in terms of the homes impacted, meaning if you had a house on this street, it is crushing at a time here in this area that is all too familiar with Mother Nature's wrath.
Splitting off.
The sight of a black funnel cloud barreling toward New Orleans.
There it goes.
Prompted gasps and cries.
There it is. You can see it. Get to your safe place.
A monstrous twister, leaving fractured neighborhoods in its wake.
This is it. This is 1934 road. This is what's left of it. Oh, yeah, you can't go in there.
This is Taryn Baker's once beautiful home, which she spent years saving to buy.
It's unlivable. You have to basically start all over.
I see a tear streaming down your
yes.
face. How devastating has the last 20
I mean, it's very devastating when you know, like it's all your hard work is just going up in the air.
Now, Baker's friends help her gather what clothes and items they can and load them onto a truck. In one sense, New Orleans was fortunate. Damn! The terror streaking over the Mississippi River only causing 1 confirmed fatality and a handful of injuries. In what preliminary surveys show was at least an EF3.
And when you see the path of this tornado, that is an absolute miracle.
On the other, a region historically pummeled from Hurricanes Katrina, Zeta, and Ida just took another blow, even if on a more micro scale.
I've been through Katrina, but this was way worse because everything was level. The whole neighborhood was level.
An area trying to bury that trauma is a particularly resilient bunch, ready to bounce back again. This is, your life, right?
No, this is my life right here out of a bag. This is it.
Sam Brock, NBC News, Arabi, Louisiana.
Some welcome news for parents tonight on COVID. Moderna says it is weeks away from asking the FDA to authorize emergency use of its vaccine for children 6 months to 6 years old. Miguel Almaguer is here. Miguel, this could happen by summer.
Yeah, Lester, it could. If Moderna does get it to use emergency use authorization from the FDA, it would be the first vaccine available for 18 million children in this country who, for now, have no other option to get vaccinated. Moderna says it'll submit its data soon to offer its 2-dose vaccine to children 6 months to 6 years old. The shot, just 1/4 of the dose offered to adults, was only about 40% effective in preventing symptomatic illness, but the company says there's been no cases of severe illness. And in another big announcement, airlines are now asking the Biden administration to roll back the federal mask mandate on planes, which is set to expire next month. They also want to lift international testing requirements. Lester?
Miguel Almaguer, thank you. In Washington, a final day of questioning for Supreme Court nominee Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. Our Peter Alexander has late details.
For a second straight day, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson facing heated questions from Republicans charging she's soft on crime.
Why did you sentence him for half the amount?
You're not recognized, Senator.
Pointing to cases where Jackson handed down sentences for child pornography offenders that were shorter than prosecutors recommended.
One of the most effective deterrents is one that I imposed in every case and that judges across the country impose in every case, which is substantial supervision. Any of these
wait a minute, Judge. You think it is a bigger deterrent to take somebody who's on a computer looking at sexual images of children in the most disgusting way is to supervise their computer habits versus putting them in jail?
No, Senator, I didn't say versus.
That's exactly what you said.
Jackson's sentences were in line with 70% of federal judges. Late last night, Republicans pressed Jackson on cultural issues too, including transgender rights.
Can you provide a definition for the word woman?
Can I provide a definition? No.
Yeah.
I can't.
You can't?
Not in this context.
So
I'm not a biologist. If there's a dispute about a definition, people make arguments, and I look at the law and I decide.
Late today, Jackson becoming emotional as Cory Booker praised her historic nomination.
You have earned this spot. You are worthy. You are a great American.
And tonight, Judge Jackson says if confirmed, she'll recuse herself from an affirmative action case next term involving minority admissions policies at Harvard, where she serves on a policy board. Lester?
Peter Alexander, thank you. Here in Brussels, as NATO leaders look for solutions, they might find inspiration in a groundbreaking woman who devoted much of her life to preserving world peace. Madeleine Albright, the first woman to be Secretary of State, died today of cancer at 84. Here's Andrea Mitchell.
I, Madeleine Corbell Albright.
Madeleine Albright, the first woman Secretary of State, was always a trailblazer, a warrior for democracy against totalitarianism.
This is a dream come true, actually a dream I never thought I could have.
Born Maria Corbell, the daughter of a Czech diplomat, a refugee, arriving in the U.S. at age 11 after her parents sought asylum from communism in 1948. She only learned in 1997 her grandparents were Jewish and victims of the Holocaust. A beloved professor at Georgetown when President Clinton tapped her to become UN ambassador in 1993. She fought for military intervention to stop genocide in Bosnia, butting heads with then Joint Chiefs Chairman Colin Powell over his reluctance to commit U.S. forces. They later became close friends. As Clinton's second Secretary of State, she was later most proud of her work stopping the killing there.
Now it's an independent country, and there's a whole generation of little girls whose first name is Madeleine.
Albright mentored generations of future diplomats.
I have not found that being a woman is a handicap. In fact, I've found it a terrific gender to be.
Her passion for pins became part of her diplomatic arsenal. A serpent, a dove, an upside-down bird to honor downed anti-Castro pilots shot down by Cuban MiGs. After leaving the State Department, Albright continued promoting democracy, teaching, visiting refugee camps into her 80s, and supporting Hillary Clinton's quest for the White House.
There's a special place in hell for women who don't help each other.
Awarded a Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2012, she considered herself first and foremost a mother, grandmother, and grateful American. Andrea Mitchell, NBC News.
In 60 seconds, watching carefully as bird flu cases tick up and up on poultry farms across America, the impact in the grocery store and your wallet.
On a day without migraine.
Hour, I'm Nick.
And just moments ago, I spoke with former President Bill Clinton by phone from his home in New York. President Clinton, thank you so much for joining us. We're so sorry for your loss. We know that you and Secretary Clinton were very close to Madeleine Albright. What are you remembering tonight?
I'm remembering, first of all, how proud I was of her and the way she conducted herself at the United Nations and at the State Department. And secondly, I've been thinking about all the meals we had with Václav Havel and how honored I was to go to his funeral and have Madeleine speak, not me, because she could stand up in Prague in a very cold cathedral and give a passionate, hot speech about her friend in Czech. And they loved the fact that an American Secretary of State was a refugee from their country. And she was so wonderful. I've been thinking about that. I was thinking about 2 years ago when we took our last trip to Kosovo, when they were celebrating the 20th anniversary of their victory and ours in ending the ethnic cleansing and the threat to Kosovo's very existence. And we walked on a sunny day down the main street of town in a parade with all Kosovar officials. And when we ended, we were down in a little park-like area where they dedicated a beautiful bust to Madeleine in tribute to the work she'd done there. You know, I'm really proud of the life she lived, and I'm so grateful that Hillary and I became friends with her. I met her in 1988 when she was working in Governor Dukakis's presidential campaign, and Hillary became quite close with her, and she was a strong supporter of her appointment as Secretary of State, and I'm so glad I did it. She did a great job.
You named her UN ambassador shortly after you were elected president in 1992, and as you said, 4 years later, you named her Secretary of State. What were the qualities you saw in her then? She was the first woman to serve in that job.
First of all, I thought she represented America's best possible future. She was an immigrant, a refugee, an American citizen. I knew she was a great teacher because she taught at my alma mater at Georgetown, and a couple of times was voted the best teacher on the faculty by the students. And I thought she would be a clear voice in the United Nations for the world we were trying to build after the Berlin Wall fell. You know, keep in mind that my first term was the first full term any president had served since the end of the Cold War, although President Bush had more than half of his term there, too. And I thought it was really important that we build alliances and stand up for freedom, because just because the Berlin Wall fell and the Soviet Union broke apart, it didn't mean that there were no more enemies of democracy and the rule of law and freedom. And so I thought she was important. And she was great in handling the issues around Bosnia. And later, as Secretary of State, great with Kosovo and many other things that we did in Asia and Latin America and around the world to promote peace and freedom and security.
Of course, being from Czechoslovakia, born in Czechoslovakia, she was part of Eastern Europe, a woman for that era with so much change in that part of the world.
Oh, yes, she was. And, you know, she and her family were basically had to leave Czechoslovakia twice. First, they were running from Hitler, and second, then they were running from Stalin. And she developed a keen appreciation of the importance of liberty and the rule of law, and she lived the rest of her life trying to bring it to everybody else.
And of course, that part of the world right now, President Clinton, is in turmoil again with the crisis in Ukraine. I have to ask you, what more at this moment do you believe the United States and NATO could be doing to help the Ukrainian people, and what is it going to take to stop Vladimir Putin?
Well, first of all, let's give credit where credit's due. First to the Ukrainians. They have fought and fought and fought, and Russia can drop more bombs and fire more missiles from ships on Odessa, but the Ukrainians have fought like the devil, and they have put the lie to the whole world of Putin's argument that they really want to be part of Russia. It's just home to Mother Russia. It's not true. And so I think that President Biden has done a good job of helping to unite the Europeans and unite NATO. And I say this with all respect to Switzerland, but it's been a rare occurrence in the last 50 years when the Swiss have walked away from the primacy of their banks and their politics.
President Clinton, we thank you so much for joining us. And again, our condolences on the loss of your and Secretary Clinton's good friend, Madeleine Albright. Thank you.
Thank you. She was a treasure for America.
And now with me, one of Madeleine Albright's successors as U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. She is Susan Rice. She now serves as the Director of President Biden's Domestic Policy Council.
I strain myself.
It's a gut check.
For the libs. There's a copy of it right there. It's crazy, Jesse. It has Hunter's signature. It has Hunter's address. It has bill to Hunter Biden with Hunter Biden's phone number with
Hellman's wants to tackle food waste, so they hired.
Where basketball fans are.
For an all-new
This is, in every sense, the seminal moment for this alliance in the 21st century. We need to be ready.
The cornerstone of NATO is Article 5, which says an attack on one NATO ally is an attack on all. Since NATO was formed after World War II, it's been invoked just once, 9/11. And now, as NATO leaders gather here in Brussels for their emergency session, at the top of mind, the fear that Putin could extend his invasion into a NATO country. What kind of shape is NATO in right now?
Lester, NATO outmatches Russia 10-to-1 in spending, 5-to-1 in troops, 4-to-1 in combat aircraft. NATO remains formidable.
If, for example, Poland were to be attacked today, how quickly could the rest of the nations answer the call to help defend Poland?
Very quickly. 60,000 U.S. troops, thousands of combat aircraft can be on scene immediately.
So far, the 30 NATO countries have remained largely united in providing military aid to Ukraine. But many NATO countries that depend on Russian oil and gas have not stopped buying it, giving a critical lifeline for Putin. Ukraine's President Zelenskyy now pleading with President Biden and NATO to go further, including tougher sanctions, and writing, how many more people does Russia have to kill for NATO leaders to respond positively to Ukraine's request for a no-fly zone or the aircraft we so desperately need? What do you think the point of this particular meeting is? Will they make concrete decisions, or is it simply a show of, hey, we're all in this together?
It's both. There's going to be a demonstrated together moment in terms of messaging, but I think you'll see significant announcements about permanently forward basing NATO troops on the borders of the Russian Federation as a signal to Vladimir Putin.
And inside Ukraine, critical medical supplies are running low on the front lines. Now volunteers are pleading for help. Gabe Gutierrez is in Lviv, Ukraine.
In Ukraine's cultural capital, far from the front lines, another urgent war effort is underway.
I'm trying to show my attitude to this situation by working here day by day.
Dr. Diana Savka is an intensive care specialist who now coordinates medical donations here. This used to be an exhibition hall, the place for paintings, music, and dance. Is now a distribution center where 11,000 shipments have been rushed across the country to the military and refugees. This is where they organize medical supplies. But in a grim reminder of just how deadly this war has been, there's a shortage of one thing in particular: tourniquets. Volunteers say military units have requested 300 tourniquets at a time. They can only provide 5.
They are extremely critical. It's the best way to stop bleeding and to save your life.
There are other battles fought here. Anya is desperate for a stroller for her daughter. Her brother's on the front lines in eastern Ukraine. Valentina's husband stayed back to fight too. Did you ever think you would be experiencing something like this? No, she says. Our grandparents told us what they'd been through, and I thought it would never happen to our children. But now it's happening. This is war on the home front. Why are you staying?
Hard to answer. I just feel myself here in the right place. I can't leave my people here in Ukraine if I know that I can help them right here, right now.
This room now holds donations from across Europe, an art gallery that is now a lifeline. Lester?
All right, Gabe Gutierrez, thanks. Up next, in communities shattered by tornadoes, a spirit unbroken, inspiring America.
It's the moment.
Keeps going down.
How rare is it to get this inside information?
Well, this is really, by all accounts, very unusual. The Russians, as we say, are very scripted in their official meetings, especially with the U.S. military. They go by script, they don't deviate, and so to see a Russian general flushed and agitated, in the words of the U.S. attachés, rare, and now this will all be scrutinized, we understand, for any clues about what really may be going on behind Kremlin walls. Erin?
All right, Barbara, thank you very much for that reporting. I want to go now to Andrei Soldatov. He's a Russian investigative journalist, the founder and editor of Agentura.ru, a watchdog of the Russian Secret Service activities. It has now been blocked in Russia. So, Andrei, U.S. officials say Barbara Starr's reporting could point to larger problems or issues with morale and chaos inside the military. You know so much about the security services, about the military in Moscow. What are you learning?
Well, it's, I would say that it's absolutely unprecedented, and it is clear that even for generals in Moscow, the situation is getting really stressful. And we see that even in public, as the Russian military now feels that we need to give some explanation to the public why the operation stalled. And today, Russian general, top level, former commander of Russian land troops, provided some explanations to the pro-Kremlin media, basically saying that, yes, we have some, well, it's not really quick, but we do not want to storm all these cities. We remember of Stalingrad. So actually he compared himself to the German troops, which was quite astonishing. And he said, well, we just want to encircle the cities and to wait and then to cleanse the cities of the Nazis, which is, again, it's quite astonishing that now we understand that we need to provide at least some explanations to the Russians.
It's incredible. And to use the word cleanse and cleanse of the Nazis, it is stunning. There is growing speculation, Andrei, about the whereabouts of another top official for Putin in the military, and that is the defense minister, Sergei Shoigu. You know, the guy supposedly in charge, the defense minister. What have you been hearing about him?
Well, the official version is that he has some heart problems, which is quite unusual because, well, Shoigu is a very healthy person, and he's always very fit. So everybody asking themselves these questions where he is. Well, the problem is for Putin that to replace Shoigu with someone right now presents a big challenge, because Shoigu is very popular, and some years ago he got rid of other popular generals, and to find a good replacement for him, to find another equally popular general right now, it's a big challenge.
Yeah, right, and of course what it would signal. You know, it's pretty incredible. All right, Andrei.
Right after Dakota News Now.
On NBC News Now.
Finally tonight, helping tornado victims find a way forward. Morgan Chesky on Neighbors Inspiring America.
Life interrupted
by Mother Nature at its worst. A family dinner, bedtime, a lifetime of memories turned upside down for communities in Texas to Mississippi and now Louisiana. Yet somehow, the damage pales in comparison to the determination to keep moving forward. Volunteers cleaning up neighborhoods just hours after being torn apart by tornadoes. Others making sure those who lost everything have something.
We just cannot explain how thankful we are for everybody's help.
In Gilmer, Texas, the baseball team wearing gloves of a different kind. While in hard-hit Araby, Louisiana.
The only instinct I knew was to bring my generator in my flatbed truck and see what I can do.
Volunteer Nate Barron, helping strangers. What do you tell the folks now picking up the pieces?
I can tell you, you just hug them, you let them tell you what you need to do. You just feel it.
Despite the damage to Stacy Mancuso-Labee's home, she's ready for what's next.
You know what? Life's a puzzle, and you just constantly have to put those pieces back together.
So tonight, they press on, finding hope in each other. Morgan Chesky, NBC News, Araby, Louisiana.
And that is nightly news for this Wednesday. I'll continue my reporting from Brussels as that important meeting of NATO takes place tomorrow. In the meantime, thank you for watching tonight. I'm Lester Holt. Please take care of yourself and each other. Good night.
American Song Contest is off to an explosion.
The proper support. Let us put your money to work. Call me today for complete details.
You know that they got the best. It's a good product.
And we'll have those vaccinations available at tens of thousands of locations.
Race theory. And you told Senator Cruz, I think it was, that when you made that statement, you were talking about decisions regarding sentencing policy. You said, and again I'm going to quote, I was talking about policy determinations. None of that relates to what I do as a judge. I take that to mean that you don't make policy determinations when you're making sentencing decisions as a judge. So today, in response to a question from Senator Grassley, you said the exact opposite. You said, and I'm going to quote you again, I have at times identified various enhancements that I have disagreed with as a policy matter because the Supreme Court has said that that's the authority of a sentencing judge in our system. So given that you admitted you made policy determinations in sentencing and you stated that you consider critical race theory in sentencing policy, let me ask you again, do you consider critical race theory in your sentencing decisions as a judge?
Thank you, Senator. Critical race theory, any academic theory, is not considered in my sentencings. It never comes up in sentencing. It was not what I was talking about in the speech in 2015.
Okay. I appreciate that. I do have one intellectual property question I'm going to submit to you for writing. You've had a long day.
Any other way to protect a married couple under the Constitution, but you argue, as I understand it, that no such right exists.
What about Clarence Thomas? He was accused of being a sexual harasser, a soda.
He was based on clinical data.
Gorsuch disliked disabled people. Alito was called a bigot, and they smeared Amy Coney Barrett.
McCord coming this spring to CNN.
But they want to know what you're going to do when you get on the court, because their kids and their grandkids are not going to have the opportunities that you have had unless we keep this nation free. So it demands your best, and it demands that you go to the Constitution first. In your opening statement, I pulled this, and this is where definition for the word woman.
Can I provide a definition?
Mm-hmm.
No.
Yeah.
I can't.
You can't?
Not in
Okay.
this context.
So you
I'm not a
believe the meaning
biologist.
of the
She's not a biologist. I'm not a butcher, but I know the difference between a ribeye and a porterhouse.
Ask your doctor about Fasenra.
One of my favorite supplements is
Situation?
Truly, I'm not surprised. But on the other hand, I will have to say that the level of their unpreparedness has come as a great surprise to me. In fact, I will say, in the words of the Ukrainians, is that they're heavily helped by their corruption.
Western officials, you know, they say Putin is frustrated, obviously, by the stall of his military and that he has been lashing out. I know, Mikhail, you have spoken about Putin displaying what you called signs of senile paranoia, but you didn't think he was, you know, crazy in any traditional sense. How dangerous is he right now?
Putin достаточно опасен, но
Well, we have to understand that Putin is sufficiently dangerous, and yet he's not suicidal. He can use mass destruction weapons, but only if he knows that he'll go unpunished.
When you mentioned President Biden, you know, he has talked about the threats. He doesn't want World War III. He says it's a real threat. Putin could use chemical weapons in Ukraine. Obviously, there are fears of what he could do with the nuclear arsenal. So far, obviously, he has not even used tactical nuclear weapons, but there are these fears out there. Do you think that they're real fears? Because they are what's holding NATO and the West back.
Я думаю, что западные лидеры повторяют.
Well, I believe that actually what we are seeing now is that Western leaders are repeating the same mistake that their predecessors committed years ago with Hitler, when Hitler was very vulnerable back then, when he tried to invade Europe. And that's what his accomplices did admit during the Nuremberg tribunal. However, what we know is that Western leaders kept saying that they were afraid to aggravate Hitler, and they thought, well, if we are not showing any resistance, then eventually he'll stop. However, that mistake has cost hundreds of millions human lives. Hundreds of millions human lives were lost, and the same mistake is being committed now. Putin will never use nuclear weapons unless he knows he's in safety. And once he's been convinced that, yes, you're safe, then obviously that just triggers him towards that.
So the Wall Street Journal reports that President Biden was ready to sanction Russian oligarch Roman Abramovich. He ultimately did not, because President Zelensky said, hold on. Zelensky thought that Abramovich could help broker some sort of a peace deal here. Obviously, I know you and Abramovich know each other. I've got a picture of you on the day your companies announced that mega merger. There you are on the screen, you and Roman Abramovich. Do you think he is the kind of key person that Zelensky thinks he is in terms of negotiating a peace settlement?
Я считаю, эти переговоры.
Well, I believe that actually these negotiations are so far fake in their nature, and they can only be real when Putin can feel that he might either lose in Ukraine or if Ukraine capitulates. And obviously, this may not be possible so far because of Ukrainians' courage and support from the West, and also if the no-fly zone is provided. But as of now, but for sure, this cannot be facilitated with the help of Abramovich's efforts.
Но не усилиями Абрамовича.
Do you think Abramovich or anyone else, Mikhail, at this point, any other oligarch, deserves to not be sanctioned by the West?
У меня к этому очень
Well, the way I see it is quite simple. Oligarchs are not true oligarchs in that sense that they actually do not influence Putin. That's just an idiotic, preposterous idea, if I may say so. Yet, they are Putin's instruments of influence. And to see for real who has broken their relations with Putin would be when they actually denounce him and when they admit that he is a war criminal. And if that doesn't happen, that means that they still depend on him and they're still dangerous.
Mikhail, thank you very much. I'm grateful to you for your time and look forward to speaking with you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And next, a mother torn as she's forced to flee with her child while still wanting to defend her country. Plus the confirmation hearing for Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson turning even more contentious today.
No, Senator, I didn't say versus.
That's exactly what you said.
I'm Greg. I'm 68 years old. I do motivational speaking.
10 Republicans on this committee led by
posturing and performance art for TV that we have seen coming from the Senate Republicans. As our friend Kurt Bardella put it, at the end of the day, these Republicans will just be a footnote as Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson makes history and leaves them in it. More on Judge Jackson's confirmation hearing next.
Our communities and was with us every step of the way. It gave us confidence in our decision. Now Dad's getting the special.
And they're not going to talk about that. But I think once they cross that border, it is a matter of relying on the Ukrainians to help them to get to where they need to do to unload the supplies that they're bringing in. But I don't think you're going to see U.S. forces escorting them, not at this point.
Yeah.
Now, that could change. If they use a chemical weapon or worse, then I think you could see all of that change.
Yeah, excellent point. General, thank you very much. The other thing that is not protecting any of these convoys once they cross the border is the U.S. Patriot missile batteries, which are up here in Poland and here. They only protect the airspace here in Poland. President Biden's going to end up just about 200 miles from here in Warsaw. U.S. president visiting within 200 miles of where the Russians have hit here, here, and here. As the map gets a little bit cluttered, we bring in Mark Lowry, who has spent a lot of time protecting U.S. presidents in war zones, former Secret Service agent, protected presidents both at home and abroad. Mark, appreciate you being with us. Is this a different situation, bringing a president within 200 miles of a war that is not really controlled by the United States?
It is. It's a greater challenge. Taking the president anywhere out of the house is an increased challenge with the increased risk that we're seeing today. The significance of going overseas, I may add, is the Secret Service has no authority over there like they do in the United States, so we're depending upon the local assets, in this case, the Warsaw, the Polish assets to support the Secret Service. We're dependent upon great intelligence from numerous resources that we can get intelligence information. But it is a challenge taking a president out of the country into a foreign country, especially into a time and an area such as this.
What are the conversations that have happened behind the scenes with the Russians ahead of the president's visit? Are there different red lines that are laid down?
You know, I can't speak on what red lines the Secret Service certainly would set down. I'm sure the government is having conversations as much as they can under the existing conditions over in Ukraine with Russia. I know the Secret Service would be dealing with the Department of State very closely. The Department of State have foreign relationships over in Warsaw that we can rely upon their assets in place. We have military assets that would be in place over there, so we're talking to those on the ground assets, both intelligence gathering assets and the military assets that could be in place to support us.
I'm thinking about, for example, when President Trump visited North Korea, walked across the DMZ. There's the picture, of course, of members of his detail farther into North Korea than he was and the like. What is the difference between it being a sort of agreed upon visit in this case, where even though you have people who were clearly enemies in a way, but that it's peacetime, for lack of a better term, and taking the president 200 miles from a war zone where you don't have control?
Well, clearly they don't have control, and it's going to be a very a time of great stress on the service and on the government taking the president over there. Obviously, the causes and the reasons are a worthwhile adventure. you know, it's an on-the-record movement. They know he's coming. For example, when George W. Bush, 43, went to Afghanistan, it was a covert operation. No one knew he was leaving. He was at the ranch at the time. Nobody knew he was leaving. It was kept very close to the chest. Many Secret Service employees didn't even know he was leaving. That's a